When I asked my stepmother what time my father's funeral was, she looked me in the eye and said, "It's over. We buried him already. No call, no invite, no goodbye. If it were you, what would you do?" Don't miss a single episode of our gripping family drama series. New stories are uploaded regularly, and trust us, you'll want to be the first to know what happens next. Don't forget to turn on notifications for more emotional family stories every day, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we live through or never dare to tell. Like, share, and subscribe now to HT Family Drama and become part of our growing community of viewers who believe that the strongest stories come from the heart of the family. My dad was buried, and I wasn't there. Not because I didn't care, but because my stepmother made sure I never knew. The day he was laid to rest, I was hundreds of miles away, thinking he was still alive and safe in his hospital bed. I only found out days later, through a neighbor's quiet, hesitant words. Words that shattered me in an instant. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I had missed a call. Maybe I hadn't checked in enough. But then, I learned the truth. And once I knew, I could never unhear it. I always thought I'd have time. Time to say goodbye. Time to stand by his grave, feel the dirt beneath my hands, and tell him the words I never said. But life and people don't always give you that. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of day where the hours drag but vanish all at once. I'd just come home from a long shift at the college, heels kicked off by the door, canvas bag sagging with ungraded papers. The sun had slipped beneath the Pacific horizon, leaving my living room wrapped in that soft blue shadow that comes before the dark. I remember the clink of my keys in the ceramic dish by the door. Louder than it should have been. Louder than the whole house, which was too quiet. Dinner was leftover risotto from the night before. I reheated it, poured myself a glass of wine, sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. Faculty emails, group chat drama, spam. And then, one voicemail, no transcription, Oregon area code. I pressed play without thinking, expecting it to be a bookstore update. "Yvain, this is Clarice. Just letting you know your father passed last week. We've already had a small funeral. No need to fly out." Click. That was it. No hello? No, I'm sorry. Just logistics. Like she was informing me trash pickup day had changed. I didn't move. Not for minutes. Maybe longer. The risotto went cold. The wine sat untouched. My phone slid from my hand and landed on the rug with a dull thud. I tried calling her back, straight to voicemail. Tried again. Nothing. I opened my messages. Almost none between us. Most of my texts were from students. Then I saw one from Dad, dated 6 months ago. "Happy birthday, kiddo. Hope you're well." I hadn't replied. The air in the room felt heavy. I opened the window. The cool ocean breeze rushed in, catching my breath in my throat. Grief didn't come as sobs. Not this time. It came as silence. A stone sinking slowly in my chest. Too heavy to cry over. I tried Clarice's number again. Nothing. Instead, I called my Aunt Meredith, Dad's older sister. She picked up on the second ring. "Yvain," she said, voice breaking. "Oh my God, are you okay?" "I just found out," I told her. "Clarice left me a voicemail." Aunt Meredith's tone shifted. Horror, then disbelief. You weren't at the funeral?" "She told me not to come," I said, the words tasting like rust. There was a pause. "She told us you didn't want to, that you blamed him, that you refused." My hands clenched on the counter. "That's a lie." "I know," she whispered. We all thought you chose to stay away. I'm so sorry, honey. I swallowed hard. I'm coming. Tonight. She offered to pick me up at the airport. I said no. I'd rent a car. I needed to see his place. Before packing, I reached up to the top shelf of my closet, pulling down a small wooden box Dad had given me on my 18th birthday. I'd never opened it. Inside was a single folded letter on thick stationery. His handwriting. Evane, you'll always be my compass, even when I don't show it right. I know I failed in some ways, but I hope one day you'll see I was trying. Love you always, Dad. No grand apology, no explanation, and yet, it hit harder than anything. As I zipped my bag, the world outside carried on. Cars passed, dogs barked, kids laughed on scooters. None of them knew my world had just cracked open. That night at the airport, everything felt like slow motion. Security lines, gate changes, overhead announcements. I sat by the window, staring at planes disappearing into clouds, wondering if I'd ever really known my father at all, or if Clarice had erased me from his life while I wasn't paying attention. And one question refused to leave my mind. Why didn't he wait for me? The flight to Portland landed just past midnight. I didn't bother checking into a hotel. I picked up the rental car, tossed my duffel into the back seat, and drove straight through the quiet streets toward the house I once called home. The sun was barely rising when I pulled into the driveway. It felt smaller than I remembered. Same trimmed lawn, same hanging basket of flowers by the porch. But it all looked too neat, too staged, like someone was trying to make it look lived in. The front door opened before I even knocked. Clarice stood there. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. If anything, her face tightened. "Didn't expect you'd come all this way," she said, voice cool. "The service is already over." "So I heard." She didn't move aside right away. Her hands gripped the doorframe like she might block me. But after a moment, she stepped back. "You can stay in your old room," she said. "I haven't touched much." Inside, the air smelled of lemon cleaner and artificial lavender, the kind used to mask something else, something older. "Coffee?" she offered, already walking toward the kitchen. "No thanks. I won't be long." She glanced over her shoulder. "You flew across the country just to leave again?" "I came to say goodbye. To my father." She didn't reply, just turned to the sink, rinsing an already clean mug. "You said it was a small service," I said after a moment. "Do you have any photos? A program?" "There wasn't much to photograph," she said without turning. "No obituary. That's how he wanted it." "I checked the local listings. There's nothing." "Like I said, no fuss." I studied her back. My gut told me she was lying. "I'd like to visit the cemetery." "Suit yourself. Plot 9A, Hillside Memorial, far left row, just grass, nothing fancy." That much, I believed. The cemetery was empty when I arrived. Morning fog still clung to the grass. A man in coveralls was locking the maintenance shed. "You looking for someone?" he asked. "William Hastings, plot 9A, my father." He scratched his chin. "Yeah, Thursday morning, I think. Woman came with a guy in a suit, looked like some kind of notary. Odd combo for a funeral." "Were you there?" "I helped lower the casket. No prayers, no guests, just the two of them. Quick." He led me down a gravel path to a bare patch of earth. No headstone, no flowers. "Temporary marker must have blown away," he said. "Happens sometimes. I'll make sure it gets replaced." I knelt down, brushing leaves off the disturbed earth. "Thank you," I murmured, though my voice felt far away. My father was here, and if I hadn't come, no one would have known. I drove without thinking. past the hardware store where Dad bought tools he didn't need, past the diner where we had pancakes when I was little, until I stopped in front of St. Andrew's Chapel. Dad wasn't a church regular, but he came here sometimes after Mom passed. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and candle wax. A reverend appeared from a side door. "Can I help you?" "My name's Elaine Hastings. My father used to come here. William Hastings." His expression softened. "Yes, I remember William. I'm Reverend Henry." "I just found out he passed," I said. "Clarice told people I chose not to come." His lips pressed into a thin line. "That's unfortunate." "Did he leave anything here?" He used to write things down. The Reverend hesitated. "Actually, he asked us to hold something for you. A letter. Said it was personal. I gave it to her last week, assuming she'd pass it on." I felt my jaw tighten. Of course she didn't. "I'm sorry, it wasn't my place." "It's not your fault." We talked a little more about my father's quiet nature, how he always sat in the back pew, alone. Before I left, the Reverend placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes grief brings out the worst in people. But truth has a way of making itself known." Back at the house, Clarice was chopping celery with surgical precision. She didn't look up when I walked in. I didn't stop to speak. I went straight to the garage. It was dusty, but familiar. Pegboard with mismatched tools, the creaky stool Dad used. I searched for nearly an hour before I found it, hidden behind an old tackle box, a small metal tin. On the lid, in Dad's handwriting, "For why?" Inside, a photo of me, Dad, and Mom, torn in half so Clarice wasn't in it. A pocket watch he used to wind at dinner when things got awkward. And an unlabeled flash drive. I held it in my palm. Heavy. Warm from my hand. Whatever was on it, I knew it was going to change everything. Back in my rental car, I turned the flash drive over in my hands. No label, no clue. Just a dull piece of metal that suddenly felt like the most important thing in my life. I drove to the nearest library. It was the only place open that early with public computers. My fingers shook as I slid the drive into the port. One file, no name. I clicked. The screen filled with my father's face. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner. His hair more salt than pepper. But his eyes, still that same steel blue. "Elaine," he began, voice steady but low. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't get to tell you myself. I wish I had. There are things you need to know, things Clarice won't tell you." He paused, glancing away for a moment, as if weighing whether to keep going. "I made mistakes when your mother passed. I thought remarrying would help. But Clarice, she isn't who she pretends to be." He leaned forward. "She's been moving money from the family trust, selling property without my consent. I tried to stop her, but she's smart, hides everything in paperwork, shell companies. If you're going to fight her, you'll need proof." My hands gripped the edge of the desk. "Go to the basement, behind the wine rack. There's a panel in the wall. You'll find a box. Keep it safe. And Evan, don't let her talk you out of what's yours. You're the only one I trust with this." The video ended abruptly. I sat there long after the screen went black. My father wasn't a man given to paranoia. If he said something was wrong, it was worse than I thought. I drove back to the house, pulling into the driveway like I'd done 100 times as a kid. The porch light was still on. Clarice was probably upstairs. The basement was just as I remembered. Cool, damp, smelling faintly of concrete and dust. The wine rack was against the far wall, stocked with bottles I knew my father never drank. I pushed it aside. Behind it, a section of wall looked newer than the rest. The wood was smoother, the paint fresher. I ran my fingers along the edge until I found it. A faint seam. It took some effort, but I pried the panel open. Inside was a plain cardboard box wrapped in an old beach towel. I carried it to the workbench and unfolded the towel. Inside, stacks of manila folders, each labeled in my father's neat hand. Trust accounts, property titles, receipts, unauthorized sales. On top, an envelope addressed to me. Elaine, this is the proof. If something happens to me, you'll know what to do. Don't trust Clarice, not with anything. At the bottom of the box was a black leather-bound notebook. Inside, page after page of names, dates, and amounts. Money taken from the trust fund, properties sold under false pretenses, even transfers to offshore accounts. And one final page, a printed copy of his will. My eyes froze on the words. I leave all property, holdings, and assets to my daughter, Elaine Hastings, in entirety. The date was only 8 months ago. I felt my chest tighten. This wasn't just theft. This was a deliberate cover-up. The stairs creaked above me. Elaine? Clarice's voice floated down, sharp, suspicious. I quickly closed the box and shoved it back into the panel, keeping the will in my jacket. Just looking for some old photo albums? I called back, trying to sound casual. She appeared at the top of the stairs, arms crossed. Those are upstairs. You don't need to be down there. Guess I took a wrong turn, I said, forcing a smile. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't press further. Dinner's in 20 minutes. I nodded, brushing past her, my heart pounding in my ears. That night, I barely touched my food. She talked about the weather, the neighbor's new car, a fundraiser she was planning for the community, all with that smooth, rehearsed tone. I excused myself early, went to my old room, and locked the door. Under the glow of a bedside lamp, I read the will again and again. My father had made it clear. Everything was meant for me. And Clarice had tried to erase me from the picture entirely. By morning, my decision was made. I wasn't going to confront her yet, not until I had backup. I called Aunt Meredith. I found something. Proof. A will. She's been hiding it. Aunt Meredith's voice dropped. Then we need a lawyer, now. Can you recommend someone who won't take her side? I know just the person. I glanced toward the window where Clarice's car was pulling out of the driveway. Good, because I'm not letting her bury this, or him. By the time I stepped into the law office, the will had been in my jacket pocket for 2 days. Folded, unfolded, read so many times the creases were starting to tear. Aunt Meredith met me in the lobby. She looked tired, but when she saw my face, she squeezed my hand. You ready for this? She asked. As I'll ever be. The receptionist ushered us into a conference room. A tall man with silver hair and a measured gaze introduced himself. I'm Richard Lane. Meredith tells me you found something important. I slid the document across the table. He read it slowly, his eyes narrowing at the date. This is recent, he said, and notarized. Do you know who the witness was? One of Dad's old friends, I think. The notary's signature is on the last page. Richard leaned back. If this is valid, your stepmother has no legal claim to the estate. In fact, hiding this could put her in serious trouble. She's been telling everyone I didn't want to attend the funeral. She's already sold property from the trust. He nodded. Then we'll need to act fast. First, we'll file a petition to probate the will. That forces her to present any documents she claims are valid. If she withholds or forges anything, that's evidence. We set a court date for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, I kept my distance from Clarice. We shared the same house like strangers, passing in the hall, exchanging curt nods at breakfast. She didn't ask where I went during the day. I didn't ask what she was hiding in the locked drawer of Dad's desk. But every time I caught her watching me from across the room, I knew she suspected something. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and coffee. I sat at the petitioner's table with Richard and Aunt Meredith. Across the aisle, Clarice sat alone, dressed in a tailored black suit, lips pressed into a thin smile. When the judge entered, we all rose. Richard began, laying out the basics. My father's death, the will I'd discovered, the date it was signed. He placed the original document on the evidence table. Clarice's turn came. She stood, hands clasped. Your Honor, my husband left a will years ago naming me as his beneficiary. I have it right here. She held up a document in a cheap plastic folder. The judge flipped through it. This is dated 2015, and it leaves the estate to you and your stepdaughter equally. Yes, she said smoothly. But Yvain told me she wanted nothing to do with her father after their disagreements. I felt my jaw tighten. Richard stood. Your Honor, may we play an audio recording entered into evidence? The judge nodded. Richard pressed play on his phone. My father's voice filled the room, steady, deliberate. Yvain, you're the only one I trust with this. Don't let Clarice talk you out of what's yours. Every head in the courtroom turned toward Clarice. Her smile faltered. Richard spoke again. This recording was found on a flash drive in the decedent's belongings, along with the notarized will dated 8 months ago. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Hastings, were you aware of this document? Clarice's hands trembled. No, I've never seen it. Are you under oath right now? The judge asked, voice sharp. She swallowed hard. Yes. Then understand that lying in this courtroom has serious consequences. By the end of the hearing, the judge had ruled in my favor. The 2022 will was valid. The estate was mine. Clarice's 2015 document was void, but it didn't end there. The judge ordered an investigation into the missing trust funds. Richard closed his briefcase. She's going to have bigger problems than losing the estate. Outside, the air felt lighter. Aunt Meredith hugged me. Your dad would be proud. Maybe, I said quietly. But this isn't about pride. It's about the truth. She nodded. What now? I looked toward the courthouse steps, where Clarice stood alone, watching me. Her expression was unreadable. Now, I said, I go home, and I find out what else she tried to destroy. That night, back at the house, I walked through each room slowly. My father's study, the kitchen where we used to make pancakes, the porch where he'd sit with a book on Sunday mornings. It didn't feel like hers anymore. It felt like mine, but not in a greedy way. In a way that meant I could finally protect what he'd left behind. In the garage, I checked the panel behind the wine rack again. The box was still there, untouched. I placed the will back inside, locked the panel, and whispered into the empty air. I kept my promise, Dad. Winning the will was just the beginning. Now came the hard part, reclaiming everything Clarice had stolen. 2 days after the probate ruling, Richard called me into his office. His desk was stacked with manila folders, each marked with the bold black stamp of financial records. These are from the trust administrator, he said. Clarice transferred over $200,000 from the Hastings Family Trust to a private account in her name. and that's just what we can trace easily. What about the properties? I asked. He tapped another folder. 4 sold in the last year. 2 commercial, 2 residential, all below market value. Buyers are connected to shell companies, which we believe tie back to her nephew in Nevada. I felt my stomach turn. So she was bleeding the trust dry while my father was alive? Yes. And if we can prove she forged signatures or falsified power of attorney, we can pursue criminal charges. The case moved quickly. Richard filed for an injunction to freeze her accounts. A forensic accountant began tracing every transfer from the trust. Clarice, meanwhile, fought back the only way she knew how, with lies. She told neighbors I was money hungry, that I'd come back only after Dad's death to cash in. She told the local paper the will was suspicious and that I had influenced my father in his final months. But every smear she threw only made me more determined. The second hearing took place in the same courtroom, but this time the tension was thicker. The prosecution, representing the trust, laid out a timeline. Large withdrawals right after Dad's last hospital stay, property sales without his consent, forged documents bearing a shaky version of his signature. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my eyes on the judge. Ms. Hastings, the attorney asked, when did you first become aware of these transfers? After my father's death. I found documents in the basement, hidden, along with his will. He also left me a video message, warning me about Clarice's actions. And this video is in evidence? Yes. They played the recording. My father's voice filled the courtroom again, steady, direct, unshakable. She's been moving money from the family trust, selling property without my consent. If you're going to fight her, you'll need proof. When it ended, the room was silent. Even the court clerk paused, hands hovering over the keyboard. Clarice's lawyer stood, trying to recover ground. Mrs. Hastings, did you ever withdraw funds without your husband's permission? No, she said quickly. Then how do you explain these transfers? He held up a printout with her signature next to the bank's verification stamp. She shifted in her seat. I managed the accounts. He trusted me. Trusted you to empty them into your own name? She didn't answer. The judge called for a recess. Outside, I stood on the courthouse steps, the cool air rushing around me. Aunt Meredith handed me a bottle of water. You're doing fine, she said. She's digging her own grave in there. I just want it over, I admitted. It will be. And when it is, you'll have more than the estate. You'll have your father's name cleared. Back inside, the final blow came from the forensic accountant. He presented a chart showing every dollar taken from the trust, ending with the exact balance on the day of my father's death. Less than $200. Your Honor, he concluded, these patterns are consistent with embezzlement, and given the defendant's sole access to these accounts, we believe she is solely responsible. The judge didn't waste words. Mrs. Hastings, this court finds sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges for misappropriation of funds, fraud, and concealment of a valid will. Your accounts will remain frozen, and you are ordered to return all proceeds from the sale of trust properties. Clarice's face drained of color. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the bailiff was already guiding her out. When the gavel fell, it wasn't triumph I felt. It was relief. Richard packed up his files. She'll likely face jail time, but the bigger victory is you've stopped her from doing this to anyone else. I thought of my father, of the quiet way he'd lived, never suspecting the war his death would ignite. I just wish he'd told me sooner, I said. Maybe he thought he had time, Richard replied, but thanks to you, his legacy's still standing. That night, I sat in the study, my study now, with the will on the desk and the flash drive in my hand. The legal battle wasn't over. There were still loose ends, accounts to recover, property to reclaim. But for the first time since that voicemail, I felt steady, and I knew exactly what I had to do next. The day after the ruling, the house felt different, quieter, lighter, like it was finally breathing again. But the victory in court didn't bring everything back. The accounts were empty, the trust was hollow, and the properties she'd sold were gone. Richard reminded me that even with the legal win, recovery would be slow. It's going to take time to get the money back. Some buyers will fight, others may have already flipped the properties, he said. Then we start now, I told him. Step 1 was the bank. The trust administrator met me in a glass-walled office overlooking the river. He was polite, but there was a stiffness in his tone. Maybe guilt, maybe embarrassment for not catching what Clarice had done sooner. Ms. Hastings, we've processed the court's order, he said, sliding a stack of papers toward me. The accounts are frozen, and any incoming payments from property recoveries will be deposited here. I flipped through the paperwork. The numbers were small, too small for what the trust should have held. My father spent decades building this, I said quietly. I'm not letting it end like this. Step 2 was the properties. With Aunt Meredith's help, I contacted each current owner. Some were sympathetic. They'd bought in good faith and were willing to work with us once they learned the truth. Others weren't. One man in Nevada laughed on the phone. Lady, I paid cash, and I'm keeping it. If you want it back, sue me. Gladly, I told him. Step 3 was the people. My father had been known in town for his quiet generosity, funding scholarships, donating to the library, fixing things at the church without being asked. Clarice's shadow had tainted that image, but I wasn't going to let it last. I organized a small gathering at St. Andrew's Chapel, the funeral he should have had. Word spread quickly. On the day, the pews were full. People brought flowers, photos, stories. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the front, hands steady on the podium. My father wasn't perfect, I began. But he loved this town, and he deserved more than to be buried in silence. Today, we give him the goodbye he deserved, and the truth he earned. There were tears in the crowd. Even Reverend Henry's voice caught when he closed the service. Afterward, people stayed, sharing memories. One woman pressed an envelope into my hand. He helped me pay for my son's surgery years ago, she whispered. I never got to thank him properly. Maybe this can help you now. Inside was a check, not huge, but enough to remind me that generosity has a way of circling back. Step 4 was the house. It had been both a comfort and a prison since I arrived, but now, with Clarice gone, it felt like it could be mine again. I went room by room, clearing out what wasn't his. The cold chrome decor she'd brought in, the impersonal furniture. I found boxes of my childhood things in the attic. A worn teddy bear, my first report cards, letters from camp. In the study, I set up the leather-bound notebook and the framed photo of Mom and Dad, the one without Clarice. It wasn't about erasing her. It was about reclaiming us. Weeks turned into months. The legal process crawled forward, but piece by piece, we started recovering assets. A property in Oregon came back after a buyer agreed to void the sale. One commercial building was returned when fraud was proven. The trust account grew, slowly but steadily. Clarice's trial on the criminal charges was set for the following spring. I didn't plan to attend every hearing, but I would be there for the verdict. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the sun setting over the garden. Aunt Meredith joined me. "You've done more in a few months than most people could in years," she said. "I just did what I had to," I replied. "You did more than that. You gave your dad his dignity back." I thought of the video message, of his tired but determined eyes. "I think he knew I would," I said softly. Spring came early that year. By the time Clarice's criminal trial began, the garden outside my father's house was already blooming. Stubborn flowers pushing through the cold ground, like they couldn't wait for permission. I took it as a sign. The courthouse steps were crowded that morning. Reporters stood in clusters, cameras ready. Clarice walked up the steps, flanked by her lawyer, dressed in pale blue instead of black this time, her hair perfectly in place. She didn't look at me. Inside, the trial unfolded like a slow, inevitable storm. The prosecution laid out the financial evidence first. Transfers, forged documents, false notary stamps. Then came witness testimony. The trust administrator, the buyers she'd dealt with, even the maintenance man from the cemetery who confirmed the strange, private burial. When my turn came, I kept my voice even. "My father trusted her," I said. "And she used that trust to take everything he built. But what she couldn't take was his voice. That's why I'm here." They played the recording again. His words filled the courtroom one last time. "Don't let her talk you out of what's yours." Clarice didn't flinch, but her hands stayed tightly clasped on the table. Her defense argued the transfers were misunderstandings, that she'd acted in the best interest of the household. But the documents told a different story, one that didn't leave room for good intentions. After 2 weeks, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." The judge's sentence was swift. "For fraud, misappropriation of funds, and concealment of a valid will, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with restitution to be paid in full to the Hastings Family Trust." Clarice's face didn't break. Not anger, not tears, just blank. As the bailiff led her away, she finally turned her head toward me. Her eyes held no apology, only the awareness that this was over. Outside, the reporters swarmed, asking how I felt. "Relieved," I said simply. "Not because she's gone, but because my father's name is clear." I didn't say more. Some things don't belong in sound bites. The following weekend, I visited the cemetery alone. The fog was lifting as I reached Plot 9A. A new headstone stood there now. William Hastings. Beloved father and husband 1939, 2022. Truth endures. I knelt, brushing my hand over the carved letters. "It's done, Dad," I whispered. "She can't touch us anymore." I told him about the trust, how we'd recovered half already, how the properties were slowly coming back. I told him about the service at the chapel, about the people who remembered him for his kindness. not the lies. And I told him I'd be all right. On my way out, I stopped at the church. Reverend Henry was in the garden, pruning roses. "It's over," I said. He smiled. "Justice isn't always fast, but it's steady." "Feels strange," I admitted. "Like I've been holding my breath for months." "Then maybe it's time to exhale," he said. That night, I sat at my father's desk with the flash drive in my hand. I thought about deleting the video, but instead, I locked it away in the panel behind the wine rack. Not because I needed it anymore, but because it was part of the story. Some truths deserve to be kept safe, even after they've done their job.